right, good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. As you finish up on your desserts, from the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome once again to the 113th season of the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us, either through our webcast, our podcast, or on Rogers TV, welcome to the meeting. Before our distinguished speakers are introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. Now, at this point, I would usually say not to applaud until all of them have been asked to stand, but nobody ever listens to that. So when I call everybody's name, I will ask them to stand, and please feel free to clap as much as you can. So in no particular order, we have Miss Andrea Cohen Barrack, CEO, Ontario Trillium Foundation. Mr. Daniele Zanotti, President and CEO, United Way Toronto and York Region. We have Ms. Valerie Chort, Vice President, Corporate Citizenship at RBC. Next up is Mr. Thomas Chanzy, Vice President of Public Affairs at the Ontario Trillium Foundation and a Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Ms. Savon Palvetsian, CEO of Civic Action. Next, we have Ms. Susan Uchida, who is the Vice President at RBC Learning. The singer of our anthem today, Ms. MJ Perry, Vice President, owner of Mr. Discount Limited, and a Director at the Empire Club. And Ms. Wafa Kadri, Director of Youth Strategy at Royal Bank of Canada. And my name is Paul Fogelin. I'm the Vice President of the Ontario Retirement Communities Association and the President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. And something worth noting, I think we actually have more women than men at the head table today, which is something to be proud of. If only boardrooms could follow suit, then we'd really be making progress, right? We also have a table of students joining us today. Where's the student table? Yeah, there you are. Please feel free to stand up from Centennial College. So this year at the Empire Club, we're making a concerted effort to expand our scope of guests outside of the traditional roster of corporate CEOs and politicians. The diversity of perspectives will afford us the opportunity to address a wide array of subjects in a meaningful way. Today's distinguished panel of executives representing not-for-profits and government agencies is an excellent example of this principle in action. And I'm thrilled to hear them speak today about the next generation of leaders. Born between 1980 and the year 2000, millennials now represent the largest employment sector in North America. I was born in 1982, so I suppose I myself am a millennial, barely, but still, which makes me keenly interested in the discussion today, so no pressure, guys. It has often been said that millennials are changing the hiring landscape by rejecting the job-for-life routine. They are completely aware that Social Security will be bleak, at best, and they practice a more laissez-faire approach to employment. Side jobs, temporary work, contract work are more within their scope. You've also no doubt heard many stereotypes about millennials in the workplace. They're lazy and entitled, compulsive job hunters who have little regard for their more experienced colleagues and expect regular promotions. Does that sound familiar? On the positive side, apparently all millennials are tech-savvy social media gurus, eager to please, learn, and bring a fresh perspective to the workplace. Well, as we know, attempts to draw definitive conclusions about large groups of individuals are always problematic. But that being said, in many ways, millennials are different than previous generations, not only as workers, but as the recipients of programs and services delivered by the organizations represented here today. The focus of the panel will be as much on youth as the organizations that employ them, what they do to incite collaboration and create opportunities for young people to thrive. Our guest speakers are not only responding to the next generation of leaders, they are helping to shape them. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our extraordinary panelists. Andrea Cohen Barrack is the CEO of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, one of Canada's largest grant-making foundations. OTF works to build healthy and vibrant communities through investments in human and social services, arts and culture, sports and recreation, and the environment. A transformative leader, she has a demonstrated history of both developing strategies which promise positive change and leading others to deliver those promises. Why don't you join us up on stage, Andrea, as I call everybody's name. Sivan Palvetzian has been CEO of Civic Action since January of 2014. Before Civic Action, Sivan held several senior executive roles with the Government of Ontario, including leading the Ontario Place Revitalization Project and launching the Youth and New Professional Secretariat, a government-wide strategy to attract and retain future generations of leaders. Sivan, welcome to the stage. Mr. Daniele Zanotti was named President and CEO of the United Way of Toronto and York Region on June of this year. With more than 20 years of experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, he has earned a reputation as an accomplished, strategic, and energetic leader. Daniele served as CEO of the United Way York Region from 2007 to 2015, and under his guidance, the charity launched new initiatives to foster community dialogue, invested in more targeted and effective ways, and brought new social services to the communities most in need. Daniele, welcome to our stage. And last but not least, our moderator today is Valerie Chort, VP of Corporate Citizenship for RBC and Executive Director of the RBC Foundation. Valerie is responsible for the development and execution of RBC's global corporate citizenship strategy, which includes strategic philanthropy, employee citizenship engagement, corporate environmental affairs, and social innovation and finance. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me a warm welcome. Join me and give me a warm welcome to our panel of next generation leaders.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and taking part in this conversation. As I reflected, there are no millennials on the panel, so we'll do our best to represent and convey all of the learnings that we've had through the many experiences that we've had to date in this regard. As was mentioned earlier, we'll be really exploring two perspectives. These organizations hire and are increasingly to different levels engaging with a number of youth as employees. They bring a unique perspective in having to listen to youth, having to think about what does the leadership of tomorrow look like, and how do they look at responding and quickly evolving their programming to being able to shape the leaders that we do need for tomorrow in terms of linking that also to a prosperous Canadian situation. So looking forward to that discussion. When I think about the number of millennials at RBC, they make up just 1/3 of our population to date. And that's today. When I look at what are leaders going to need for tomorrow, those leaders are currently in place with some of those millennials, but the way that they will choose to lead, that their expectations around leadership is also evolving quickly. And we need to think about what do we need to do as an organization, even speaking for RBC, how do we better need to pivot and react and change some of our fundamental programs and policies that we have in place to be able to capture that. I just wanted to call out one key example of that, and it was actually championed by Susan Uchida, who's in the room, which is called our Career Launch Program. And it was really geared to bring and help to facilitate the transition from education to employment and allow these bright individuals the opportunity of experiencing not only work within RBC, but also work within the not-for-profit sector, because we need to better understand what motivates a sense of purpose for young people. And it's interesting, when we do a lot of post metrics with respect to this programming and ask employers in terms of for the not-for-profit and the career launch associates, what has been their best experience to date. And in a significant number, over 83% of them say that they have really benefited from the not-for-profit experience. And the response back from the agencies that they have been working with has been that they've brought a new sense of optimism. They've looked at the new ways of actually delivering some of the key programming, and both parties actually learn. We learn in terms of RBC because, in fact, we have the ability of doing a lot of feedback loops and also understanding what do we need to change internally. And we have one Career Launch Associates, who's Josh here, who's doing his work term within United Way. So it's really nice for him to be able to see that. So as we start on this conversation, I think it'd be helpful to better have a sense for how do each of the organizations actually engage with youth from their perspectives. Maybe we'll start with you, Andrea.
Sure, thanks, Val. So we have two different perspectives that I think I'm going to be addressing today. The first is that we have about a third of our employees now that are considered millennial. And we've had a huge cultural shift in that because just 3 years ago, we were only at about 18%. And so we've had to really respond as an organization to figure out how do we keep up with this ever more agile workforce. And there's things about that are fabulous for us. We want to harness the energy of that because we know that millennials are far more engaged in social issues. So while they may not have a lot of paid experience doing the kind of work we do, many of them have been contributing to social causes since they were, sort of able to read and write. And so there's a lot of benefit there. There's some tension around the fact that, there's lots of questioning of assumptions and maybe rejecting bureaucracy. And we're a government agency. I'm not saying we're bureaucratic, but there is a tension there. But on the flip side of that, we have obligations for transparency. We've just recently come under the Freedom of Information guidelines that we have to do. And actually for our younger cohort of folks, it's not a big deal. Like they've grown up with that, just being the reality and living in the public sphere. The second piece is what we grant to. And in the last fiscal year, we granted about $32 million into youth-led or youth initiatives, and that's just under a third of our annual budget. So how we make sure that we are engaging in those initiatives with youth matters greatly. We want to make sure that we're having positive impact, and we really need to frame how we're thinking about that into the future. And of course, our youth-led initiatives are coming up with all kinds of different models that are innovative and different to be able to try to get to that impact. And we're going to try to measure it over time and see how it goes. We're keenly interested.
Daniele?
We, about $87 million are invested each year at United Way into community. And so I'll speak for a few moments on how we connect young people to opportunities, how we create pathways for them to succeed in life, and then how we champion that work internally. So Matt lost both of his parents when he was 5 and went from group home to group home. One bad choice, and he ended up in juvie. He, at the barber in Newmarket, they told him about this little community program that was happening up in Georgina. So he went in for this summer program to do woodworking and design. This kid has hands of gold. And so in short order, they decided that Matt was going to be the lead hand. Then they connected him to this United Way job program down the street. And that job program created a pathway for him to get to post-secondary education and a career that is going to change his life. And through that, he linked up with our network program, where he's got now a mentor just about his age, a little bit older, who's working in the region in the same field and helping him navigate the job. One day he aspires to being on our Gen Next cabinet, where other millennials from across the region are doing good. And Matt's just one example of how United Way works on the ground to connect people to programs and agencies. And then we create pathways for them to connect to mentors or post-secondary education. And deep down at our core, we continue to invest dollars for community to respond to youth and emerging issues.
So I have the great privilege of being the CEO of Civic Action. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with that, we're a city building organization. We like to figure out what are those big urban issues that need an all-hands-on-deck approach and then get on with seeing action. I like to say we're civic action, not civic chit-chat. So we focus on getting stuff done. You cannot get something done in this town without millennials. 80% of our staff are millennials. It's all I can do to keep up with them. And we do working with the next generation a couple of ways. The first is we run some programs that take young people from the sidelines to the driving seat of shaping this city and this region. In fact, today is the launch of our next cohort of Civic Action Diversity Fellows. Every year we pick 25 rock stars. I'm talking, this is the Navy SEALs program of civic leadership. We pick 25, few of our fellows are here this morning, which is phenomenal, and we put them through what we think of as a civic MBA. So you come out on the other end ready, armed, loaded, and ready to take on challenges that shape the city and region for the good. That's our concentrated program, 25 a year. But we have an emerging leaders network of almost 1,000 rising leaders from across the GTHA that are plugged in. That's the less concentrated version, but it's phenomenal, and some of the leadership of our Emerging Leaders Network is here this afternoon as well. So that's on our Emerging Leaders front, and I love that work. It keeps us energized, and it keeps me optimistic. But we're a city-building organization, so we pick those topics that are hard, that need an all-hands-on-deck approach from all the sectors to see action. One of those issues is infrastructure. Millennials, and I find this so fascinating, right? Because we always criticize, oh God, they pick jobs every 2 years, they're picking a new job, and they're so self-entitled, and they want this and that. Guys, this generation is inheriting 30 or 40 years of little to no funding on infrastructure. That's sitting on your shoulders. This generation is inheriting the highest tuition rates of any generation that preceded it. This generation is inheriting the highest household debt to GDP than any generation before it. You can go on and on. Childcare rates, housing affordability. So if this generation is not plugged in to shaping the policies that affect and create this city and our wider region, then we have a problem. Because the largest generation to walk the earth is coming up the ranks. They're ready. They need access to the influence to see their ideas realized. That's in part what we do at Civic Action. I'm very proud of that.
So building on that, and it's interesting the perspective of how do you build civic action, civic responsibility, civic awareness into the generation. Because in fact, that's one of the real benefits that we actually saw from the Career Launch program, that spending 4 months within the not-for-profit sector allows you to really understand what work gets done and how does it get delivered, and then when I'm changing or leaving and perhaps doing something different within the not-for-profit sector or working for corporations, you need to understand the linkages and the cohesiveness. How do you come together to solve increasing problems? Because in fact, the societal fabric really needs to be a connected one. And what always challenges us as funders is often we actually see the disconnect versus the connected fabric. And I do think that there's these forums where we're actually coming to the table to solve for an issue together and to achieve collective impact, a terminology that we're hearing much, much more versus something I'm going to be funding it and this is my program. No, together, this is a pretty big, difficult problem. We actually need to drive and achieve collective impact together is definitely the future. And young people get that. Right, the connective aspect is pretty challenging and becomes much more innate for them. So you've talked about some of the program that you've done, but we know some of the myths or characteristics that we've heard in terms of the increased expectations for transparency or for motivated work or the removal of the hierarchy. Right, we might say that we really need to think about reverse mentoring. Or can you talk a little bit more about either the challenges and how some of those challenges have actually shifted to opportunities within your sector?
Sure. So every summer I take this big stack of books that I want to read all year long, and then I get some vacation up at the cottage and I just plow through like on a mission. And one of the books that I read is called The End of Power. And it's fascinating. It's thick, it's dense, it's powerful. But it was interesting because when you think about where has power traditionally sat for millennia, it has come down to a couple of key sources: influence and information. But when the pillars of each of those start to disintegrate and fall away, it becomes a bit of a free-for-all for who has power, who can get power, where can power be shaped. Millennials have never been more than a fingerprint away from all the information of all the world ever. They can have access to almost anyone through social media, through an ability to know where the person's going to be and show up and ask them questions. So influence and information are playing with new pillars in a way that this generation has no idea to expect anything less. When I worked at the province, and one of my jobs was to think about how do we bring new professionals into the public service, it was clear to me that the value proposition had changed. We would go to campuses and say, do you want to come work for the public service? And they said, yeah, what's that like? And I said, well, there's a whole bunch of jobs, and this is what you can do. And they said, I'm going to go to Africa and build wells with Engineers Without Borders. See ya. So we had to be really careful about thinking about what the value proposition for impact looks like in some of the other sectors. Frankly, it's a heck of a lot easier for my sector. My team is 13, 14 people. I ran a comm shop in government that was 49. And the ability to get closer to the action when there is not a lot of red tape is what allures this generation in particular. Red tape, when it's drawn out too long, becomes red noose. And one of the things that any organization, regardless of size, needs to be mindful of to make sure that you see that impact of that next generation is get them close to influence and information. The further you keep them from that, the less likely they are to stay.
So is that something that you've then done within Civic Action? Like, have you liberated that type of innovation or approach? Like, did that force you to change some of the way that you deliver your programming?
Fortunately, and anyone in the nonprofit sector knows this, I used to think that you could run something on a shoestring, and then at the end of a shoestring there's that little nubby plastic thing. That's what most nonprofits run their outfit on. You don't have the luxury of hierarchy in some of these. So someone has a great idea, they come in and say, I think we should do this. You say, good, let's do that. And off they go. There's not an issue note. There's not 14 sign-offs. I remember writing tweets, and Paul, you were with me. I remember writing tweets to respond to a tweet that had come into the minister, and 13 signatures to sign up on the tweet before the person in the minister's office could say, bing. Like, what? So the nonprofit sector is the best equipped to be able to tap in. And there are lessons. Often we turn to the private sector to learn from you on how to think about impact and how to think about metrics. There's actually a neat reverse mentoring where government and private sector can turn to the nonprofit sector and say, God, how did you guys figure this out and what can we bring back with you? Because the nonprofit sector are not sidelined people, okay? This is the accidental giant that shapes our life today. 8% of this country's GDP comes out of that sector. 11% of economically active people work for that sector. It's game-changing if you listen to it.
Daniela.
These two have the best one-liners in the business.
Best
one-liners.
And for Daniele to say that, that's a real
compliment. This is high compliment.
You have more money.
I personally don't know. So in 1887, a rabbi, a minister, two priests, and a lady got together. And, no, this is serious. And they went to a bar. No, they didn't. They didn't go to a bar. They went to a round table. And they sat around drinking coffee, and they said, we have these community challenges. How are we going to work together to address them? And the first United Way was born in Denver. And they focused on three things: assets, belonging, and change. So when we talk about young people, if we were doing a panel on baby boomers or Gen Xers, I would say the same thing. When you allow them to engage with the weight of their assets, when you allow them to own an issue, and when you focus on a substantial and substantive change, they're in it to win it. And we saw this as a quick example. We have the who's who of campaign cabinet, volunteers from across this region, corporate leaders, labor leaders, government leaders who help us raise dollars year after year. And we were talking about some of our digital challenges internally. And one of our millennials at the table, a staff person, says, maybe we should throw that problem out to millennials. And I think, good God, how are we going to do that? United Way wants to control every issue that we talk about. We need to be right in there. And Dave Mackay, president of RBC, said, we've got a group of millennials that I think can help unleash solutions. From that little offer from Dave Mackay, a senior exec from RBC gets involved. 70 millennials aged 24 and under get together on a friggin' weekend in June to spend 48 hours at the RBC Water Park place helping us find ways to engage young people in this region. They drank a lot of Red Bull, they ate bad, unhealthy food, slept, ideated, doodled, dropped code, whatever they do. And in the end, on Sunday afternoon, they came up with solutions that we could not create on our own at any table. And so for us, just like we would do with seniors or anything, I think when you talk to people, if you begin with their strength and their assets, let them own the problem, and then say, what is the change we're impacting? Good things happen. Today, as we speak, that group of millennials, supported by RBC and United Way, is taking that solution to market and driving a change that will not only impact our little world at United Way, but the very region we live in. For us, what it's meant, though, on the receiving end, is to be able to embrace the innovation and the web of ideas that come with this group, because it does require change organizationally to accept that and allow for that ownership to unfold.
Andrea.
There's lots of myths that are easy to go on. I think at OTF, one of the things that we've realized is when we are confronted by those myths, whatever they may be, it makes us feel uncomfortable because we have to shift the way we think about an issue or shift the way that we do business. And so there's a couple of examples where I think actually the negative myth has had a hugely positive impact on our organization. The first is that sort of myth that millennials are the gold sticker generation, right? Everyone needs a prize, and it's really important that everyone get that. And what that's about is the need for constant feedback, right? And so you need to be continually told, yes, you're doing a good job, and it's fine. And one of the things that we noticed when we were doing our talent and engagement surveys across all of our teams is that one of the biggest, the highest correlations between employee satisfaction was, did they get regular feedback from their supervisor, right? And that wasn't just about millennials, that was for everybody. And in fact, if you want to have a high-performing organization that's really able to tackle these huge problems, you need to be able to have that constant feedback. And actually, our lead of business intelligence is here with us today. And we're actually experimenting with apps now that you can use, so you can have this reciprocal feedback between manager and staff for, like, how are we doing today, or are you sure what your goals are, and being able to see that go back and forth, which I think is going to be really, really great for everybody in the organization. And the second thing I think we'd comment on is this issue of loyalty. And we had a real sort of us and them mentality, I think, before at the foundation, which was we had, previously a big majority of our staff who'd been there 15, 20 plus years, and then all of these, young upstarts that are coming into the organization and causing all kinds of trouble. And the idea that, well, there's no loyalty, and, we used to ask the question even, are you gonna stay with us for 5 years? And I think, who cares? Yeah. Who cares? We don't need people to stay with us for 5 years. And so that issue of loyalty is, first of all, about, I think, an environmental context we've created, because we're not offering anyone full-time permanent jobs anymore. So let's not, be critical of that when we don't make that a possibility. But secondly, when we think about, all of our plans are, 1 year to 3 years in the future, because we're in this rapidly shifting environment. And so we need to figure out, how do we get solutions for 1 to 3 years? And our HR lead had this great line to say, because millennials who've done lots of the contract work and project-based things and volunteer work have a diversity of skills and experience that you just don't get when you've been in the same job year after year after year. And so our HR director says, yeah, we would rather see 3 years of diverse skills and experience than 20 years of having the same year of experience over and over again, right? And so what we see as an advantage is in fact not an advantage. It's really, really good that people have this breadth of experience. And in fact, when we look at our grantees, even in that, when we have our organizations that have been around a really, really long time, their expectation is always that they'll keep coming back for grants again and again and again. And we often have trouble with that, to say, no, we don't do core funding, you need to, it's project-based funding. Where our youth-led organizations, they're fine with that. If they get 2 to 3 years of funding, that's the world. Like, they move on to something else after that. And so I think it's this shift that we all need to kind of embrace and just alter our own time frames under which we're going to measure success.
That's so true. And I've gone through a couple of job postings, and it's interesting because you have to call into question some of the internal unconscious bias, because typically, what's the first thing you put in your job description? X number of years of experience. And I'm starting to find that many are applying and get frustrated because they're saying you shouldn't just be assessing me on the number of years. We need 15 years of experience in this because we kind of do the math and we add it up and says, okay, you probably are you can do this job if you've done these pieces. But to your point, Andrea, it should be like just measure what I've been able to do in a rapid way or in an efficient way, and if I could deliver it a lifetime within 5 or 6 years, then measure me on that. But otherwise, we might start to lose credibility in terms of putting these numbers there for the sake of numbers versus we're really interested in understanding what do they produce, how innovative have they been in terms of delivering of these types of things. On that war for talent, you hear from millennial surveys in terms of working for a company that's delivering on purpose and in alignment with kind of personal values. You have a really privileged position to being able to offer something pretty unique in that respect. And I'm just curious if maybe we'll start with you, Steph, in terms of have you found that as an advantage in terms of attracting and retaining employees, just the type of work that you're actually asking them to deliver? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All of us have worked for organizations, or many of us have worked for organizations, where when you walk by the C-suite, those up on the wall are those words that are the values, the corporate values, right? And frankly, 50% of them in every workplace are exactly the same values. So there's respect and integrity and, fill in the blank. There's a big difference between font on a wall and values in practice. At Civic Action, we have the benefit of having a city building ethos as why we exist. So it's actually not a huge challenge for us to bring in talent because the mission is so in line with what a lot of people are passionate about. But the gift wrap atop the mission needs to be equally authentic. If our diversity fellows, for example, didn't have other colleagues that they get to meet in that program that were also movers and shakers from other sectors, if they didn't have city building projects that get up off the ground, if they didn't have access to senior executives the way we promise, then all of that would dissolve and it would end up being font on the wall. So I think the most important leadership attribute that I've come to observe, certainly in this time at Civic Action, has been authenticity. Mm-hmm. This generation can smell through inauthenticity faster than anybody else. And if you want it, and it captures a lot of what we talked about, being able to see that there's a career progression, being able to know that your idea will be listened to, understanding that the values that your company's CSR report publish, 70% of companies on the TSX have CSR reports that talk about how they invest in the community. But then if people get in, they aren't seeing that lived the way that the language, the font on the wall says it is, well, then they're going to vote with their feet. And the other organization's going to be so happy to grab them on the other side. So I would say authentically leaders at the top that live the values, that forget drink the Kool-Aid, they waterboard in it. It should be that authentic. And transparently, this is taped. Oh, that's great. That's great. Transparently being able to have the values that you espouse in practice in the office.
Daniele.
Ditto.
Yeah. I need a one-liner. Yeah.
No, ditto. But I think So obviously, if you're coming to work at United Way, mission, purpose, and shockingly, we do a United Way campaign at United Way too. And the millennials want to lead the damn thing. They want to be in there doing good internally. And when we started talking with our corporate partners about a networking or a mentoring program that I referred to earlier that Matt went through, where we partner up kids that are in the community with people already in the sector doing the work, our millennials were the first internally to say, should we not be mentors as well on this platform? Like, isn't that authentic that we also participate? So, of course, internally at United Way, do-gooders abound, and we encourage and inspire. What's inspiring for us is the do-good mentality that exists for millennials outside of United Way in your workplaces. TD is a great example. I think some of them are here today. They've got the largest Gen Next cabinet and infrastructure in the region. Hundreds of millennials who are engaged. And when we first started Gen Next, we thought, throw a couple big parties, have a cocktail, and the millennials will be happier than pigs in poop. But no, they actually said, we want to start doing tours. So they did a tour of Kensington Market and Regent Park, looking at the neighborhood, the demographics. To Sev's point earlier, they then said, we want to start talking about infrastructure. Infrastructure. Jennifer Keesmaat, our city planner, had hundreds of millennials in a room listening to her talk about our infrastructure and the impact to community and neighborhoods. And they asked the toughest, best questions of any audience, bar none. The month later, they had, I think they call him the sixth dad, Councillor Norm Kelly, attend a session. And they went from strategic infrastructure system to selfless, they wanted selfies with Norm Kelly. So this is the world we live in, right? Where they can go from strategy and infrastructure right through to the social media, but craving to be part of this region and the issues in an authentic way.
Just cognizant of time, and we have about a few minutes to wrap up, so I think I'm going to ask each of the panelists to maybe give us one or two takeaways from the discussion, from their experience, again, balancing youth as employees, youth as an area of service delivery, and what would be your advice to this audience? Andrea?
Sure. So when I think about my 4 years that I've had at OTF, we have done the single biggest pivot and strategy shift in our 30-year history. And that's been really, really challenging for people who want to protect the status quo. And you know who doesn't want to protect the status quo? Our millennials. And we see, I'm actually amazed, even in all of the organizations that we fund and all of the partner organizations that we're dealing with, they're all in times of this dynamic and shifting external context. And they're trying to then reposition themselves to be able to respond. And it's a time of huge disruption, not just in the private sector space, but also in the social space. And so if your organization needs to then figure out who's going to challenge the assumptions, who's going to see those new solutions that are out there, who's going to champion the change for you and be able to do that, it's the millennial group. And so the sooner you sort of are able to kind of recognize that and really, really leverage that power, I think the better prepared we're all going to be to then be able to look forward and respond and lead in that time of disruption.
Yeah. Daniele?
I think you mentioned earlier the corporate fight for talent also equals the community fight for talent, time, and treasure. And in the past, we often thought about the two as separate or siloed. But I would suggest that today, millennials are really driving a B to C partnership. They want to go to work, they want to excel, but they want to be connected to the community. And so for companies and for community, The win is engaging people in this authentic way that Seb referenced, and making them belong. Because that really is the win for all of us and for the community. But it does require a new way for us in our sector to engage not only with companies, but with millennials in very different ways. And we're learning as we go as well.
Advice, pack up the fax machine. And I realize I'm sure my team is laughing hysterically because I am far more Luddite. Like liquid paper is more comfortable to me than Instagram, 100%. When I started this job at Civic Action, I'd come out of the province where I'd been in for a senior executive for 10 years. Now, anybody, put up your hand if you are or have been a public servant, please. Yeah. So you know what I mean when I say you are nameless and faceless, and that's part of what you sign up for. The only time as a public servant your name is ever out there is if you blow a whistle, break a law, or earn 6 figures. That's it. And you're fine with that. So I remember taking this job at Civic Action. We have an incredible board. Zabeen Hirji, who works at RBC, is one of our board members. And I went on a tour to meet all of our board members. Peter Slowly is one of our board members at Civic Action. He used to be deputy chief of police. I went to the police headquarters, and you get a little nervous when you go in. Even nothing wrong, but you go into the headquarters, go up to the 7th floor, and Peter had this huge, expansive office, and you sort of sit there. I didn't know where do I sit? Do I sit here? I was so nervous. And Peter comes in his outfit and takes his hat off and puts it beside me, and he says, "We can't find anything on you." And in that moment, I thought, whew, that's great. I'll tell you, 3 years later, if that had still been the case, I would not be doing my job right. There are times and places for being nameless and faceless. Mm-hmm. But if you want to connect with the next generation, and if you're a leader that needs to connect with that next generation, you need to be where they're having their conversations. I got a Twitter account despite myself. I joined LinkedIn despite myself. I'm still not on Instagram, but I get it now. The point is, you have to have conversations that plug into where people are. Back to that authentic piece. You need to make sure that you're having the channel switch to just the right focus. And the mediums are at times just as important as the content you're trying to shove through them.
Great, thank you so much. You know what, we've had the pleasure, the privilege of working with each of these organizations, and I agree that this moment in time of transformative approaches to how we're delivering on significant social issues and social opportunities has been really encouraging and exciting as we all look to deliver on collective impact. So I thank you all for your wise words of wisdom, and I'm not sure if I don't think we have any time for questions. So if you do have questions, we can stick around. Yeah.
Thank you
so much. Yeah. Thank you.
Great job. Great job.
That was fantastic. That was really fantastic, guys. It's my pleasure actually now to invite Susan Uchida to thank our esteemed speakers. Susan from RBC.
Thank you, Paul. I'll be very brief. I also work at RBC. It feels like an RBC commercial this afternoon. Wasn't the intent. But I do have the privilege of working very closely with Valerie on RBC's youth strategy, and I can safely say that what you see today is what you get. I can vouch for the fact that there is no one more enthusiastic and more supportive of our opportunities for youth today. Thank you to our panel who have shared their experiences, and what I really appreciated was how real your stories were and very practical as well. So Sivan, Andrea, Daniela, and Valerie, thank you so much for your time today. I would say also this is a call out for the rest of the audience to join us in helping to keep the confidence of our youth in Canada today, to support that transition from school to work that you heard about, by offering where you can real work experiences, access to networks, and to professionals who can help guide and support. our young people today. And if I can add on to the comments around our CEO, Dave Mackay, who was so impressed with the talent he's seen today and in the past, marveling over 2 patents that young people filed on behalf of RBC in the past 6 months. He said, young people today, they are going to change the world. And I think after today, we're all believers of that. So thank you so much again, panel. We really appreciate it, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.
Almost at the finish line, just a little bit of housekeeping. So a tremendous thank you to RBC as our sponsor. So it may have been a commercial, but this is the right type of commercial, okay? We can't do our events without our sponsors, so once again, thank you so much for stepping up to sponsor them. I would also like to thank the National Post, who's our print media sponsor and helps promote our events, Rogers TV, our local broadcaster, and MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space for live webcasting. Yes, Yvonne, this was live webcast. Live webcasting today's event to thousands of viewers around the world. And although our club has been around since 1903, we have moved into the 21st century and are active on social media. Please follow us on Twitter at empire_club and visit us online at empireclub.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Finally, please join us again soon. We have some really exciting lunches coming up next week. On Monday, we have Mr. John Chen, the CEO of BlackBerry. That's on September the 26th. On the 28th, we have Mr. Alain Belmer, the President and CEO of Bombardier. On the Thursday of that week, it's going to be a busy week. On September the 29th, Ms. Darren Lavelle, the head of the school at Bishop Strachan, to talk about women's education. And then finally, on October the 6th, we have MPP Patrick Brown, who's the leader of the Ontario PC Party. So once again, thank you for attending today. A quick plug for something we're doing at the Empire Club this season. It'll be the first time in history we're going to host some evening events, and this is in an effort to attract a younger audience to the club. Not everybody can get the time out in the middle of the day to come to these kinds of speeches. So if anybody in the room, it doesn't have to be just millennials, anybody wants to participate in these events, we're going to be looking for ideas. Please speak to the staff over there. The more ideas, the merrier. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.